Let's go back to a few weeks ago. There was one subject that Guyanese were complaining incessantly about, the constant blackouts. Not many people stopped to ask what was causing it, but behind the scenes, government and engineers at GPL were working around the clock to ensure the lights stayed on. First, why was it happening? Between August of 2020 to February of this year, nearly 60,000 new businesses have been registered. Another 5,000 companies were added in the same period. This includes a number of manufacturing companies requiring a substantial supply of electricity. And then you have new homes. More than 30,000 house lots were distributed, which means the construction industry has been busy, to say the least. Add it all together and you begin to get an idea of just how much strain this was putting on the grid. It was a challenge for engineers at GPL. One mistake and the entire grid could crash, leaving us all in darkness. In mid-April this year, peak demand in Demerara and Berbice hovered around 180 megawatts. At the same time, the available capacity of the grid fell well below the peak demand. Let's break this down. A megawatt of power is the unit used to measure the output of a power plant. 1 megawatt of electricity is sufficient to toast 89,000 slices of bread. We visited GPL's control center on Dennis Street, Sophia. We want to find out what exactly happens when GPL officials, their engineers and technicians are faced with the issue of electricity demand overpowering supply. Hey Navin, how are you doing?
Hi, good afternoon. I'm good.
So you gotta tell me a little bit about some of the work that happens here. This is the control center, yes?
Yes, it is.
So walk me through what happens here.
New Sophia Control Center. Well, my name is Navin Dionarayan.
Yeah.
I'm the System Control and Operations Manager. This department and this section of the department strictly deals with managing the grid. Right? The entire DBIS is managed from this room. And it is done through the assistance of the SCADA system, whereby this monitors the voltages, currents, power flows, and so forth throughout the DBIS.
You gotta tell me what DBIS means.
So, I'm sorry, so DBIS is the Demerara interconnected system, well, Demerara interconnected system merged with the Berbice interconnected system, forming the Demerara-Berbice interconnected system.
Yeah.
So it's a system that runs from Hydruni, Perica, all the way to Molson Creek in Berbice. Right, so we control that entire corridor. So we also use the technologies available to us to help us to make decisions daily and by the minute.
Right.
So one example is this here. So we have here a software we're trying to build internally. All right, and what it does is log all the generation data every hour. Right, and you can see the operator now entering the data. So she's entering what generators generate at a specific time, right? Now that will lead us into plotting graphs such as this, and this of course. This tells us, for example, this is the amount of generation we have available. Yeah. So this plot here comes from that data that the operator enters, which he receives from power plants. And this line shows us the demand, right? So you see, for example, at 12 last night and in the early mornings, we have some space, meaning there is some amount of reserve capacity.
Between the two?
Correct.
Right.
But at this time, we're seeing that the demand is fluctuating here and even touching the capacity line. So when that happens, that is when we see a difference in our frequency. Therefore, we will have to, for example, at this point, open a feeder, because there is essentially zero capacity remaining, and if we allow it to continue like that, we may eventually end up into a situation where there's a trip of a generator.
So help me to understand, when you say open a feeder, what do you mean?
When we say open a feeder, it means that at the substation, there's a circuit breaker there, similar to what you have in a house, but a bigger version, that supplies power to the lines that we see running along the roadways. And of course, there are multiple transformers connected to those lines on poles, and then we as customers get power from those transformers. So once we open that circuit breaker at the substation, that line goes out, so essentially the customers don't receive power anymore. All right, and that is what we mean when we said open a feeder.
You're saying that this disconnection sometimes is necessary.
It is absolutely necessary because that's how we manage the frequency and keep the system alive. If we don't do this, then the entire system may collapse, thus everyone is out of power.
In fact, we got an opportunity to see that happen inside the control center.
It is low right now, and it's telling us that the demand is greater than our available generation. So in order to balance the demand and the capacity we have, we just opened a feeder to maintain the 60 hertz which we have to operate at. Now any deviation from that 60 hertz means there's an issue in the grid. If it's too high, we have too much of generation. If it's too low, then we have an excess of demand. Now the excess demand is what is really critical. Once that happens, the potential exists for one, either additional feeders to trip, or two, the entire system goes down. So it's a careful management of the frequency. That's one of the most important parameters we monitor here in the control center.
So basically what you're saying to me, if I understand you clearly, what has to happen here is there's just a few seconds that could be missed, that could be moved, and the entire system could go off.
Correct.
Tell us from your perspective, what is it really like being a part of and operating in this room?
Running this control center, I could see it takes a different mentality, right? For example, these gentlemen here and lady, you have to be in a certain state of mind. For example, we take seconds to make decisions. It is not something that is pre-planned. I mean, we do some amount of planning. For instance, if we expect the demand to reach a certain value, then we plan for that, right? So we may have some contingencies already worked out. So our decisions can be faster, our decisions can be more accurate. Let's talk about taking feeders off. We don't randomly take off feeders. Right? We developed an algorithm that would determine which feeders to possibly take off. All right? Now, this is done based on criteria such as when last the feeder was out, how long it was out. Was it out for planned maintenance? Was it out because of an emergency maintenance? Was it out because of generation shortfall? So we do a rotational system. All right? So we don't give the same place blackout twice in the same day,
unless
it is absolutely necessary.
Right. But for customers, the big question remains the same. How can we ensure the lights stay on? Thankfully, the government of Guyana recognized the immense impact these challenges can have on the thousands of people and businesses relying on electricity for their day-to-day operations. In May, the government contracted Urbicon Investments to procure a 36 megawatt power ship to be added to the grid. As a result, the control center is now in a better position to distribute power across the Demerara-Berbice interconnected system. Take, for example, the month of May, when demand for electricity peaked at 183.2 megawatts. The grid remained stable. The difference? The power ship was by now hooked into the grid and running at full capacity. So while demand was 183.2 megawatts, the capacity of the grid was a whopping 191.8 megawatts of power.
As you know, previously there were a lot of generation woes where we had a shortfall in generation, causing us to having to do some load shedding. All right. The country had experienced this, and everyone knows about this. So with the introduction of the 36 megawatts power plant via the power ship, we have not taken out feeders because of generation shortfalls since the introduction of that chip. All right. This has given us some comfort presently in relation to being able to carry out maintenances on other generators. For instance, currently we have like 2 generators down for maintenance as we speak. Previously, we couldn't afford to take those generators off without load shedding the public. Now, given that we have this excess in generation as we speak now, of course, it's easy for us to do all our maintenances, get those generators back to maximum capacity so that we were in a better position to serve the country.
Extensive work is underway on the gas-to-energy project at Wales, which is expected to add another 300 megawatts of electricity to the grid. The plan is to eventually get Guyana's generation capacity to nearly 500 megawatts by 2025. And that same year, demand is expected to peak at just under 300 megawatts. This, the government says, will take care of the supply and demand challenges that GPL has been experiencing for years. And blackouts will be a blip on our collective radar.